A good day, good day. I do hope that you're doing well. We are continuing with our Bible reading lessons. This is day 98 of our Bible reading. We've read from 2 Samuel chapter 13, 14, and 15. As usual, I'll be giving a few lessons from some of the highlighted verses, starting with a high level overview. Now, in chapter 13, we begin to see that the kingdom of David seems to be falling apart. And perhaps this was due to the sin that David had committed, which he had committed adultery and murder as well. And part of the judgment and prophecy was something which, what we are reading, begins the chain of those events. It's very sad in chapter 13, we see the death of David's son, Amnon. But he was murdered by his own brother, Absalom. And the reason for his murder was that he had assaulted Tamar, his own sister. Again, this is chaotic. All these three are siblings. Of course, Absalom and Tamar shared the same mother, while Amnon did not. David does mourn the death of Amnon. But what's sad is the fact that when Amnon had assaulted his own sister Tamar, David did little. He did little. And now that led to what has now happened. In chapter 14, we see how Joab arranges for Absalom's return. This, of course, is that Absalom had to flee because of the death of the murder he has caused. He has murdered his brother Amnon. And Joab arranges that perhaps the king can bring back Absalom. And what's interesting to observe, which I'll teach a little bit about, is that Absalom, though he returned to Jerusalem, he was not at the king's presence. He had not yet returned before to eat even with the king. And then these two is sorted out. Absalom reconciles with David. However, by being closer, in chapter 15 we see Absalom begins a conspiracy against David. So he steals the hearts of Israel. He wants to win favor for him to emerge as a king. And David now flees Jerusalem. And we're going to see a sad story. And I think that a part of David's Psalms come from this story when he's on flight, not from Saul, but from Absalom. Of course, there would be other Psalms which came from his flight from Saul. But I think this one was too close to home. His own son. And David is on the run. The king flees Jerusalem, his own house. He leaves his own city, the city of David. And all of this began with a sin. Friends, sins have consequences. Sins can lead to chain reactions, and yet, yes, we can be forgiven. We can be reconciled with God. And God does that, and we are reconciled. And yes, God in His mercy can also remove some of the consequences of our actions, but sin does have consequences. Sin does lead to chaos, destruction. This is exactly what we're reading about. Not just David's sin, even the sin of his sons. Now let's go to some of the highlighted verses, starting with 2 Samuel chapter 13. Verse 2 says, "And Amnon was so tormented that he made himself ill because of his sister Tamar, for she was a virgin, and it seemed impossible to Amnon to do anything to her." What a weird verse. And of course it should have been impossible. It's your sister, Tamar. This is his sister. And yet he's being tormented because he wants to be with her. But I highlight this verse to just remind us that part of the law of Moses, as we read in Leviticus, made it a sin for Amnon to uncover the nakedness of his sister, which simply means for him to have relations with her. This was a forbidden thing. So I don't even know what the writer means here when he says it seemed impossible to Amnon to do anything to her. Like, was he saying it's impossible for him to find a way to... Like, what do you mean? It's already impossible. It should have been impossible based on the law. And this is the sin that is taking place. So already the law of Moses condemned. The law of Moses did not allow Amnon to do what he was to do. Because the only sister you were allowed to have was a stepsister. But there was even a condition of being a stepsister. Someone who you don't even live with. But Tamar was not Amnon's stepsister. She was a half-sister. We can say half-sister because they shared the same father and not the same mother. But half-sister is too close to home because you have the same blood. You have the same father. So it's only a stepsister that he would have been allowed, and only in the context of not staying in the same household. Alright, so verse 14, very sad. But he would not listen to her. And being stronger than she, he violated her and lay with her. This is so sad. But I highlight this due to verse 15, which says, then Amnon hated her with very great hatred, so that the hatred with which he hated her was greater than the love with which he had loved her. And Amnon said to her, get up, go. This verse broke me. It broke my heart. How is it that Amnon could do such a thing? And friends, this is the nature of sexual sin. It might look tempting and you should do this thing, it's going to be nice and all of that, but it can come with lots of regret. It did not even take a day. It did not even take an hour. Right after, it says that he hated her. Why? Because this thing that you're doing was not allowed. It was a forbidden thing. It was an abomination. When we approach sexuality in an immoral way, oftentimes it only leads to bitterness and hatred and shame. The best thing for us to do is to do things the right way. Get married. And I want to speak especially to the ladies and say, oftentimes you're the one who gets destroyed the most. Oftentimes the man can run off, go elsewhere. And this was the man, Amnon. He wanted her to go, get up, go, after such an event. And you see, for Tamar, this thing was a great devastation. Because for them, it was not about as long as I'm not pregnant. No, for them, it was about their virginity as well. They kept it sacred. They kept it. It was important. It was a shame for them not to have, not to be married and doing things the right way. For her, this was a shame. This was her being devastated. This was very bad for her. It would have been better for him to have asked her hand in marriage, even though it was illegal. What a sad verse. And what I want to highlight with this verse 15 is to show us that some of these temptations, some of these sexual temptations, they just look appealing before you get into it. But once you get into it, it is ugly, it is dark, it doesn't build, destroys. Best place for us to be, friends, is to do things the right way. Get married, especially the ladies, because sometimes the men leave you with a child and they just move on. Best to get married. And I know I might be speaking with people, some people might be hearing me who have already committed themselves in fornication and in all sorts of things. God has forgiven you if you have indeed repented. There's no condemnation. You're forgiven before God. Notice how David was forgiven, so much so that God loved Solomon. It says that God loved Solomon. Solomon was to be the next king. God is a God who forgives. God is a God who redeems. But I'm speaking to those who might be tempted. I'm talking about the future, not the past. To say that let us protect ourselves. Because this is lust, it's not love. The fact that a minute after he hated her means that it was lust. What a sad event. Verse 17, he called the young man who served him and said, "Put this woman out of my presence and bolt the door after her." This is sad. And what's sad about this verse, which really breaks my heart, is that it is still happening today, where men are abusing women, whether it was consensual or not. But there's an abuse taking place, where they discard the woman and say, "Now you can go. I don't want you to be in my sight." It's a very sad thing. And what, for me, I can say, as I've been saying, is let us honor the marriage bed. Let us do things the right way. Let us do things, because when you do things the right way, there's no shame, there's only joy. Verse 21. When the king heard of all these things, he was very angry. That's all it says. What else did you do, David? Why are you just angry? When King David heard of all these things, he was very angry. What else did you do other than anger? Why didn't he punish Amnon? Why didn't he do something to say, but this thing, because this thing, by the way, can be classified as something that is even deserving of the death penalty. When we don't deal with sin, when we do nothing, when all we can do is be angry, then that opens doors for chaos, for destruction. David did nothing. He was just angry. At least that's what the scriptures are saying. Verse 22. But Absalom spoke to Amnon neither good nor bad, for Absalom hated Amnon because he had violated his sister Tamar. So here is another sad thing that happens when holding hatred in heart, not speaking neither good nor bad. Very dangerous place to be. No wonder Jesus says, do not be angry. He said, you have heard it was said, do not commit murder. I say, do not be angry. Because anger is like a seed. When you hold on to this anger, when you bottle it inside, what a seed of destruction. You can see that he spoke neither good nor bad. It is far much better to speak bad than to not speak bad. It's better to tell someone that you are hating them. Not that hating them is good, but it's just worse to hate them and say nothing. Because all you're doing, you're building it up. And one day you will erupt and burst, and all that will be unleashed into chaos and destruction. So this is some of the places where people can have broken relationships, broken marriages, broken many things. Why? Because they bottle things inside. It says Absalom spoke to Amnon neither bad or good. And then verse 39 says, and the spirit of the king longed to go out to Absalom because he was comforted about Amnon since he was dead. I mean, David is an interesting character. After a while, he was healed of the loss of his son Amnon, but his own son Absalom, who had murdered Amnon, the king longed out to go. The spirit of the king longed out to go out to Absalom. It means that he was willing to reconcile. He was willing to make peace. That was David. He was just a man who seemed to have had a big heart, or was this old age, but still an amazing thing to observe about David. He's a man who forgives. He's a man who was willing to reconcile. And based on that, Joab then arranges a plan to ensure that Absalom can return using the woman of Tekoa, as we have read. But the one part which I've highlighted is verse 32, which says, Absalom answered Joab, behold, I sent word to you, come here that I may send you to the king to ask, why have I come from Geshur? It would be better for me to be there still. Now therefore, let me go into the presence of the king, and if there is guilt in me, let him put me to death. I really find this verse interesting because, as we have read, Joab had arranged that Absalom can be returned back to Jerusalem, and Absalom really needed to speak with Joab so that there can be more than just returning to Jerusalem. There can be an arrangement for him to return to the king's presence. But Joab was not even wanting to go before Absalom, so Absalom arranged that his field must be put on fire, and that way it will attract Joab's attention for him to go before Absalom. But what's going on here? Absalom went all out, including setting to fire the field of Joab so that he can speak to Joab, so that Joab can then send the message to the king. Absalom went all out. What was the bottom line? I mean, I'm not saying let's burn people's fields, but what was the bottom line here? The bottom line is that he wanted to be in the presence of the king. It was not enough for him that is back in Jerusalem. It was not enough for him that is back in the city. It was not enough for him that is at least close to the king. It was not enough for him that he is having access perhaps to some of the royal privileges. It was not enough. He wanted the presence of a king. And I just saw something positive here. And I just began asking myself, are we satisfied by being in close proximity to God? Being close to God perhaps because we go to church. Being close to God perhaps because we listen to songs, to gospel songs. Being close to God perhaps because we read the Bible. Being close to God perhaps because we know someone who's a Christian. You're close to the things of God. You're close. You're in Jerusalem. You're close. You're in Jerusalem. You're close to the things of God, but you're not at the presence of God. So here we see that Absalom went all out, including setting someone's field on fire, so that at least there can be an arrangement for him to bring this word before the king, so that, but why am I not in your presence? He even says that if there's guilt in me, let me be put to death. It's as if he's saying that it is better for me to die than to live when I'm not in the king's presence, because it still feels like being an outcast. It still feels like I'm too far away. It still feels like, how is it that I'm in Jerusalem? How is it that I'm close? How I'm in Jerusalem, but I'm not with the king? Friends, we also need the presence of God in our lives. We also need to have a relationship with God. We also need to be those who really abide in Jesus. Jesus says, abide in me and I in you. He in us in him. We need to have that intimacy with the Lord, where we are close to God, where we are with him, where we are abiding with him, not just close to the things of God. Not just going to church, not just reading the Bible, not just saying I have a Christian friend, but being someone who has a relationship with God, able to fellowship with him, to have communion with God. That will change your prayer life. You won't just pray, you're praying with someone that you're connecting with. There's a connection in your prayer when you have a relationship with God. I found that very interesting, that Absalom wanted to be close. However, chapter 15 shows us that sometimes being close, people can abuse a closeness. In fact, this reminds me of some of the things we read in the book of Numbers. We saw Aaron with his sister Miriam speaking against Moses. And later on, we saw Korah speaking against Moses. So, but Korah was a Kohathite, meaning that he was not just any Levite, he was the Levite clan assigned to the holy things, meaning he was brought closer to the things of God. So it's quite interesting that those who are close can still be the same people who conspire against the leadership. And it's true even that people can be really Christians and still go against one another, or still even go against God for that matter. Like the sense of you're close to God, but now you get too much used to it that there's no fear of God anymore. We need to still have the fear of God. So for me, that's the main lesson, at least in chapter 15, as I connect with chapter 14, which, yes, we're promoting the idea, let us have fellowship with God, let us go close to God, but let us still have reverence for God. Let's not make our closeness and take it into an advantage for ourselves, and then begin to conspire and do things against God. That's what we see in chapter 15. Verse 6 says, thus Absalom did to all of Israel who came to the king for judgment. So Absalom stole the hearts of the men of Israel. So what's going on here is that because now he's been brought close, he's taking advantage of it, as I'd been explaining just earlier. So I can move. Verse 21. But Ittai answered the king, "As the Lord lives, and as my lord the king lives, wherever my lord the king shall be, whether for death or for life, there also will your servant be." This immediately just reminded me of Ruth. Ruth said to Naomi, "Where you go, I go, where you stay, I stay. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God." So you can see how Ittai answered the king, saying that actually I'll go with you. I'm with the king, and really it speaks something of loyalty. But I just want to speak about us as well, that will we say, "Jesus, where you send me, I will go. Where you go, I go. Jesus, I'll follow you. I will be yours." Even though things may seem to become difficult and challenging, I will hold on to Jesus. I'll cling to him. So here we see Ittai clinging to David. Isn't that beautiful? I love it. All right, so verse 25. Then the king said to Zadok, "Carry the ark of God back into the city. If I find favor in the eyes of the Lord, he will bring me back and let me see both it and his dwelling place." I once again love the heart of David. David did not say, "Okay, now that I'm on the run, let me also run with the ark of God. Perhaps it will give me favor along the way." Or actually, "I'm the rightful king. I'm going to take the ark of God with me. Why should it stay with the wrongful king?" David did not fight his own battles. He realized that there was the right place for the ark of God to be. Instead of him attempting to take this ark and use it as a charm, perhaps, like the Israelites did back then, and they were beat down even when they had the ark. And that's when the Philistines captured the ark, and we read about how the glory had departed from Israel. Here we see David saying, "Actually, no, I might be on the run, but I'm not running with the ark of God. I might be on the run, but the ark of God belongs where the ark of God should be." So he's not trying to force matters. He even says that if I find favor in the eyes of the Lord, he will bring me back here. So David doesn't force things. He allows things to happen. We don't need to force things. Just pray. Just allow God to work things out. If things seem not to be working, don't force it. Let God work it out. Continue trusting in God. Verse 30. But David went up the ascent of the Mount of Olives, weeping as he went. What a sad verse. Weeping as he went, barefoot and with his head covered. And all the people who were with him covered their heads, and they went up weeping as they went. This verse really gives you a picture which is so sad. And when I read this verse, I just immediately remembered that David authored almost half of Psalms. It could have been part of such events, which are full of sadness. Him walking barefoot, his head covered, weeping as he went. It could have been out of this context of brokenness, of attack, of being beat down, and a low point that David would have written some of these Psalms that we read. See, God does speak even in our low points. God does lead us even in our low points. God does work things out even in our low points. David in his low points was able to go back to God, and he wrote his Psalms. As he was running away, as he was in trouble, he said, the Lord is my fortress. The Lord is my shepherd. No, he acknowledged these things would have happened out of contexts like this. So Don't be afraid of whatever you're going through. Don't be afraid. God can work it out. God can work it out. Weeping as you're going, barefoot as you're going, in shame as you're going. Hold on to God. Trust in God. He will work it out. Trust in God. Don't fight for yourself. Don't take matters in your own hands. Don't force things. Let God work it out. May God indeed work it out in your life. Amen and amen.